Yeah, hi, I'm Thomas Behe from the graphic novel Contraband, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's March 26, 2021. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Thomas Behe about Contraband. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, and it's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Thomas is the CEO of Octopus.sh, a self-sovereignty identity platform. A product innovator, published author, and MBA graduate of Ivey Business School, he's launched identity solutions for Experian, Barclays, Sky, and ITV. His case studies taught at Harvard, Ivey, and Copenhagen Business Schools, and has appeared in Wired, Kuppinger, Cole, and the Financial Times. Together with artist Phil Elliott, Thomas has created Contraband, published this spring by Marcosia, and described as the first tech fiction comic to expose the stark dangers of social media, online cyberbullying, privacy invasion, voyeur spying, fake news, trolling, and corporations abusing people's data to influence public opinion, make billions, and dominate the social fabric of society. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Thomas Behe about Contraband. Thomas, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me.
Yeah, no problem. It's really good to be here. Thanks, John.
I appreciate it. What I normally do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
Yeah, it has to be all the Archies. That we used to, my older brother used to bring home, and they were the first ones, but probably not the most memorable, because he used to have lots of Conan comics as well. He used to scare the crap out of me when I was a kid as well. So yeah, I like the Archies probably a lot more, but yeah, Conan scarred my brain forever. So that's it.
Good stuff. Well, I'm wondering, Archie and Conan, good influences as a younger person, but who influences your work today?
Yeah, I'd have to say I read quite a lot of some of the Dark Horse Image comics of sort of the 90s and the noughties, to be honest. I'm gone a little bit of a blazing trail on that. Now, I have to be truthfully honest. I did an undergraduate degree in sort of creative writing. Quickly realized that being a journalist and then going into business was probably a better way of making some money. So most of my reading were sort of novels and whatnot, and I kind of got back into reading graphic novels and comics. When they got really popular, sort of late 90s and early noughties, they just sort of exploded. And I started with the Frank Miller and the rest, and then I just started picking out on them like anyone else. So I kind of got really into graphic novels, sort of probably in my late 20s, to be honest. So there was that unfortunate gap between my comic reading as a kid, and then and when I sort of got in the late 20s. But yeah, it's hands in the air. That's me. I just really got into the medium when it really started accelerating and be renamed graphic novels, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's similar for most creators. There was a bit of a gap, and then I think it was around the time of Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, where people went, "Whoa, there's actually something here for me." Other people, it was Sandman, for example, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's not just for kids anymore. We're here talking about your latest project, Contraband, for Marcosia. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about it and maybe the origins of the project too.
Yeah, that's no problem. So what happened, John, is back in 2004, I started working at a mobile network operator, and they basically at the time had nobody who would manage what was referred to as adult content. And so when I took on the adult content in the UK, it was actually not only some of the brand labels that you might see on the top shelf of some of the shops. It probably sounds a bit like a dream job, John, but to be honest, it probably wasn't as exciting as people think it was. But I also had to manage a lot of the new content that was coming in. So video phones, there was a bit of a convergence happening in London, so 2005, 2004. Video phones and social media sort of came together, and all of a sudden I got inundated with all this content, stuff that you start, people make a very big fuss about, and there's lots of legislation around upskirting, spying, these sorts of videos started showing up, and I had to sort of moderate them. And I sort of had this idea that there would be if somebody got a hold of this stuff properly and started to harness it and making some money, what's the story? And the story sort of came from there. So of course I created a nice bad guy who did that, and I created a nice naive guy who got caught in the middle of it, and it sort of took off from there. A couple of years later, once I got a sort of a story and a script together, I got in contact with a couple of potential illustrators. And Phil Elliott was, I actually knew of him from some of the work some of the books that I was reading. He did a cool book called Illegal Alien, the Dark Horse book that I picked up, and incredibly, he said, I'd love to work with you on this, and asked for a little bit of money, which was okay, and I had the money to pay him, and he was really excited about it. So we got stuck in. So it was really great. Good idea, I think, at the time, and I got a great illustrator to work with me. And so, as you know, in comics, it can be quite challenging to find a publisher and whatnot. And we had a couple of publishers that were quite interested in it. And so it took off from there. So we launched the book in 2008 with Slave Labor Graphics originally. And that book was reasonably successful. We've got some good reviews, got some mainstream coverage from the Financial Times, a couple of Canadian publications as well. Wired gave us a plug as well. So we got some really good press. And, after sort of finishing that, about 6 months ago, I had an approach from another comics publisher who thought, they'd read it and thought it was quite timely given all of the things that are happening with the transition of the government in the U.S. and how Trump was kind of, the president himself seemed to be quite doing a lot of the things that we talked about in the graphic novel sort of 12, 13 years earlier. So it was decided that we'd pull it back out and do a reissue, re-edit a little bit, give it a new cover, and come back out to the market with it. And so far, so good. It's been the interest in it's been really, really strong. And so I think that kind of summarizes what's happened with the book.
Yeah, no, it's very timely for sure. I know that as we're speaking right now, I think it's Section 230 in the United States is being reconsidered. I know at moderators, like what you went through back in 2005-06 is now being a major focus for moderators of content on social media today. Yeah. And I know that there's some outcomes of that are pretty tragic, having to watch things that they'd rather not. So it's really unfortunate, but I'm glad you're able to come through and tell this tale. You mentioned your collaborator, Phil Elliott, the artist, and I wanted to let you know that once I read your book, I got a feel for David Mazzucchelli's Batman Year One vibe from his artwork. I'm wondering, was that your intent?
I wish, he was, when we talked about doing the graphic novel, like someone like Phil he's so versatile. It's funny you mentioned Sandman and Neil Gaiman. He published some books with Neil Gaiman. He's done some work with Alan Moore. He's done stuff with Eddie Campbell, for example. And so when I said, he kind of said, well, what's the style you're looking for? And I asked him to come out with sort of something that he thought might be appropriate. It was a nice contrast to some of the dark themes and effectively the dark web community. And he thought the contrast would good with something like around a Lynn Clare. And that's like, almost, I guess, to put that for people what that is, that's more like do Tintin, but only things have kind of gotten really nasty, I suppose you could say. So,
definitely not a Tintin book.
It's really not a Tintin book, but to play on the fact that it's a nice contrast, and certainly it's kind of worked really well in terms of having that sort of passive and understated effect of the illustration when you're coming out with the top 10 snuff films, I guess, of the week. It's and that was the approach that we took, and Phil recommended that, and he sent me a one page with had some ideas around that. It just looks really good, and the gray tones around that, and we had to run with that for sure.
Right, for sure. Now, we talked a bit about some of the aspects of what you incorporated in this book. So I'm curious to know, who is the audience that you're writing for? Like, I know every creator writes for himself, to make sure that you're happy with it. But who ultimately do you think would be the audience for this?
Yeah, I think when it first came out, I wanted to sort of get a story out there to do a little bit more of the sort of it's a science fiction, sort of the tech fiction, I guess, is a sort of new genre that's come along in the last sort of 5-10 years. I really wanted to kind of people that like the Blade Runners and the this kinds of movies that might use technology to kind of influence society, I guess. And that's a sort of an idea that I have in terms of who I would target. And, because when it came out, most of these things weren't really happening. They weren't prevalent. I just sort of, I guess I was in the right place at the right time, where I saw it right at the beginning and when it started happening. And then I created this story, which kind of imagined a world where all these things were going on. So here we are 13 years later, and it is all going on. And you have social media doing these things. You have social media trying to be moderated, and you also have people who are getting fed up with it. So instead of just having a situation of saying, look, the target audience are these tech thriller loving guys who are, really quite like the idea of where the future could go. Now I'm sort of targeting a wider base because of people saying, yeah, it makes sense. You're going to have people who are going to get sick of social media being told what to do and banning, censoring content. And then you're going to have all these sort of really quick upstart type social apps that can pop up on the dark web that can service segments of people and make a lot of money, and all that content. The place to be now is going to be, it's going to be there because it's not regulated. It's not going to be something that the government can control, and they'll always be playing catch up with sort of that dark web underside of things. And to be fair, the dark web itself is kind of something that's kind of pushed and it's kind of hidden. I don't suspect it's something that most governments and corporations really like talking about, to be honest. But let's face it, it's there. And actually, only the smartest technology people are on the dark web right now. And it's like anything else. It starts moving into wider masses of people. And then you're going to have less and less control over some of the things that the books talk about.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I want to shift gears slightly and talk about maybe what Marshall McLuhan, a famous Canadian, said is the medium, the message. And I'm curious to know why you chose the comic book medium to tell your story as opposed to perhaps a narrative form like Cory Doctorow might do in a novel.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. And yeah, I love Marshall McLuhan. I remember studying him when I was growing up in Canada as well. It was good. I got him in high school as well. And it's amazing because, even David Cronenberg and the rest are sort of reference him. And it's quite interesting that you asked that, because some of the feedback I'm getting from the graphic novel is that it's quite wordy, right? So you have lots of panels, there's lots of pages, the characters are expressing themselves. So I tried to kind of come up with a graphic novel that just was a bit more in line to how people are on social media. And that tends to be quite showy, and it tends to be quite speaky, and people have lots of content, always quite happy to sort of share what their thoughts are. And oversharing, I think, is probably a good term to use. So all the characters tend to go on these slightly longer tirades of what they think and the conversations that they have amongst themselves. So it is probably one of the wordy graphic novels you're going to find out there. But I thought the graphic novel was great just because, it sort of gives a picture of what's happening in that time in London. And obviously it's a fun read. I think pictures are really fun to, they're really fun to read with the dialogue as well. Yeah, when you've got someone like Phil who's drawing the stuff for you and conveying a lot of the emotions, and some of the people, some of the side characters he's put in there are just fantastic. You can kind of just see the expressions in their faces and whatnot, and I think that adds to quite a lot of it as well.
Yeah, there's some great themes in there, some great subject matter to get across, and certainly in talking to creators, they found the graphic novel is probably the easiest way to get the message across. So we've talked about Contraband, which is getting out in April, and I wanted to know what's next for you. What is your next big project that you have coming up?
Yeah, so currently I'm working on a follow-up. Part of the reason of coming back out to the market with this is we're going to come out with a sort of follow-up that sort of capitalize on the concept of the whole idea of Contraband. And what makes it so explosive is the fact that a hacker is able to go in and give control of the entire platform to any influencer with the most followers. So it's kind of like if an activist hacker group got in and said, look, Mark Zuckerberg, we've stripped this from you. Whoever's number one, whether that's, Kim Kardashian or Ronaldo, they now get control of the entire Facebook. But as soon as they move to number two, whoever is number one will be able to take control of the big social media platform in the dark web. So what we're working on right now is we're working on a story that kind of plays on that. So what kinds of things will people do in terms of obsession for that sort of fame, money, and power to reach the pinnacle, to be the top ranked influencer on a social app? obviously it's sort of a statement about society today, because obviously people are quite keen to have a number of likes and followers and whatnot. And that means quite a lot to people. But the idea is just how far will people go to reach that sort of pinnacle? And so we're working on a story which takes that concept and it's more European centric as well, sort of North European. And it's got some new characters and whatnot, but it sort of plays on that concept.
Very intriguing. Good stuff. Yeah, cool. So where can people find out about your current work and your forthcoming work online and through social media?
You can reach us on contrabandgraphicnovel.com, all one word. That's our website. We've got a website. We're just upgrading it right now as we speak. We have a preview section on there. And I went on a bit of a mad tangent and created 14 different translations, which required 13 proofreaders and translators and 3 designers. And it was just a rabbit hole I won't wish anybody to go down into, but it's there. So I beg everybody to go and at least download the Japanese or the Hindi version just for the sake of doing it, because it's there and it's 6 pages of the preview of the comic written in that language. So, but yeah, I think it looks pretty cool, and I hope everybody else does too if they have a look at that. Yeah, so they can go there, and then I'm on Facebook, TJ Behe, and we've also got a page for Contraband on Facebook as well. If they want to connect and come and check out any of the updates, we usually post a couple of things on a week up there. And as we move into the next sort of follow up, we should be hitting it pretty hard over the next 2-3 months as well after the release from Arcosia.
Very good. Well, Thomas, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering if there's something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview.
If people want to check it out, if they have any questions, they can contact me directly as well. I always like having chats with people about it. And I hope if anybody gives it a read, they enjoy it.
Thanks to Thomas for the chat. You can discover more about Contraband online at contrabandgraphicnovel.com and at marcosia.com/contraband. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2021.